Hello and welcome back to Management 201. Today we talk about organizing and delegating work, and there are several things that we'll need to cover for the session to be successful. Let me start by introducing basically the topics that we're going to go over. Not all of them we'll cover in full detail, and the ones that we will not address in detail, I definitely suggest that you go back to the textbook and read some of those aspects there. Today, I will talk to you about the basic principles of organization, authority, organizational design, some of the contemporary challenges and approaches to organizational design, job design. So, this has to do more with how your work is organized and not how the organization itself is structured. And we'll conclude by talking about organizing yourself and delegating responsibilities because as a manager, that will be one of your tasks to decide which activities to delegate, which tasks to delegate, and how to make sure that whatever you delegate actually gets done on time and at the level where you and those above you are satisfied with the performance. So, first of all, I'll talk about the principles of organization. Organizations, they typically have their goals and objectives, and those goals and objectives are larger than what a single person may accomplish. In a sense, this is the reason for the organization's existence, right? It requires a coordinated activity of multiple individuals, and those individuals, in order to fulfill the objectives that the organization pursues, uh, have to somehow organize themselves. The big tasks have to be split into smaller chunks, and people responsible for those individual chunks, they have to work together, they have to work in unison, in harmony, and even though everybody will be specializing in something, the overall activity, the overall work of the entire collective has to be coordinated and integrated. And to that end, there are several principles that help to structure organizations in a way that makes it possible. And the single most important principle that I would suggest you really remember, if there's one thing you take away from this session, it's this one principle, is the unity of command and direction. It sounds a bit abstract, but basically what it says is that each employee within the organization should only have one boss. I think it's fairly easy to understand why this is the case. If you have multiple bosses and they are not in the agreement, you will be in a horrible position. You will not be sure whom to listen to and what to do when they disagree. You will also be facing specific challenges because if you have multiple bosses, you have to decide, or there has to be some sort of an organization level decision as to whose authority is more important, right? If they are in disagreement, who do you listen to? It also unfortunately means that if you have multiple bosses, sometimes if you are skilled at political games, you may actually not do much at all and simply have the bosses, argue among themselves. You may hide behind each of them and you would say to boss A that, hey, I'm doing what boss B told me. And you will tell to the boss B that, I'm busy doing something for boss A. So, from the organizational effectiveness standpoint, unity of command is a key principle, and there are some structures that violate it. As our experience shows, they are not the most effective. So there has to be this clear understanding of who reports to whom, and each person should only be reporting to one other individual. If you look at the entire relationship of who reports to whom, that gives you an idea of a chain of command, right? So it starts with a possibly CEO or president at the very top, and then from the top, the chain of command goes all the way down through top level management to mid level management to frontline management. And it has to be visible, has to be understandable. Everyone has to know the structure of authority within a company. So that's the idea of chain of command. Span of management. That is another important concept which primarily deal with how many people should report to a single individual within an organization. Obviously, that will depend on the hierarchical level within the company and probably the nature of the tasks that those employees have. But you have to remember that as humans, our mental capacity is limited. There is some research that shows we cannot manage more than 7 people adequately. Again, it all depends. If people under you, your subordinates, have highly repetitive routine tasks and the supervision is minimal, then surely you can do more than seven. You can have more than seven subordinates. For highly complex tasks, the ones that require creativity or maybe that are harder to control and follow, maybe even seven is a too large number. So, based on the span of management, organizations can be flat and tall. When managers have a great number of employees reporting to them directly, the number of those layers of management will be limited. So, you're going to have a flat organization. When the span of management is narrow, and you have just a few people reporting to their managers, the organization structure will necessarily be tall. So I want you to remember those labels. Flat organizations and tall organizations, they basically describe how, vertically developed the organizational structure is going to be. Division of labor is an important principle that determines which tasks are grouped together. It basically has to do with specialization, departmentalization, and integration. And what it does effectively, it tells you for the overall organizational tasks, what are the subtasks, what are the groups of tasks and organizational functions that you recognize, and so you allow people to specialize in those certain tasks. So, in most manufacturing companies, there will be someone responsible for the inbound logistics, someone who deals with suppliers. There will be someone responsible for the manufacturing process, the transformation of inputs into outputs. There will be someone in charge of marketing, someone in charge of customer service, sales, delivery. There'll be a great number of other services like HR and legal and corporate finance. So will that is the specialization. At the same time, all of those separate tasks have to be somehow integrated. Even though everybody is doing this one specific job, right? The finance versus marketing versus engineering department, they still have to operate on the same schedule, doing the same stuff at about the same pace so that the organization can fulfill its obligations meaningfully. And departmentalization basically refers to how those unique specialized functions within the organization are put together so that the activity of each of those functions is integrated for the benefit of the organization. Within the organization, precisely because you have those different layers of management and different functions, you have to carefully balance responsibility and authority. Responsibility refers to, I guess, you being accountable for the task you assigned. Once you are in charge of a specific project, it does become your responsibility to ensure that the project is completed, or whatever tasks you have, that you do them in time with good quality and possibly no defects. Authority refers to your, I would say, decision making power, your ability, first of all, to decide for yourself what to do, but then also to tell others what to do. And there's this distinction between authority and power. Authority is primarily, well, it's a narrower concept. It does describe your ability to tell others what to do, power is broader. You can influence others without telling them or without having the authority to tell them what to do. Right? So power can be a function of maybe you're this organizational founder and you've created the company and it has grown to a certain level and it has been acquired by someone else. So whoever has acquired the company put new people in place, new CEO, all the top management team. But by virtue of having created the organization, you still have the power to influence what people do within the company. You may influence the external environment and how it perceives the organization. Authority, there's formal authority and informal authority. Formal authority simply is vested in you because you occupy a certain position within the company, right? If you are vice president, typically you have a lot more formal authority than a manager that works probably two levels below you. Informal authority, you may again be able to tell others what to do without having this formal position that enables you to give others directions within an organization. So at the university, you guys probably know how we're organized. We have different departments, and the department leader position is typically an elected position. So the person who becomes the department chair probably gets that position for 3 years, with the possibility of extending it for another three. So once that term limit is reached, the person still retains a lot of power, right? Because people remember him or her as being in charge. The former chair does know all the policies, knows how the structure works, how politics operates within an organization. So even though there is no formal authority left with that person once he or she is replaced, there is still a lot of informal authority vested in this prior holder of this chair. And, that's how it works in the universities. It may easily work like that in almost any other organization. Um, of course, you have authority to perform certain tasks and responsibilities, and you are ultimately accountable for the organization's reaching its objectives. But you cannot do everything alone. As a manager, you have to delegate some tasks. Like you have to reassign some of your tasks to people who work under you, and you do that through delegation. Right? This is a formal process where you empower your subordinate to do some tasks on your behalf, on the organization's behalf. You also give the person, um, so not just the responsibility for the task, but the authority to make decisions. Now, the ultimate accountability is with you. You cannot delegate that, right? You're still responsible for to the shareholders and to the stakeholders of the company for everything that happens under your supervision. But when you delegate certain tasks, the responsibility and authority also goes to that person, and then it becomes your responsibility to ensure that they actually can deliver. So it's very important to choose correctly who to delegate to and to institute a system that allows you to track performance, to get some corrective actions if that is necessary. Because, again, your own responsibility, you can never delegate away. Um, with respect to authority, right? So going back to authority, it could be formal or informal, and I touched on that previously. There are also different levels of authority, and we distinguish between four levels: authority to inform, authority to recommend, authority to report, and full authority. So when you delegate a task, or generally if you are in charge of a specific organizational unit, or you just happen to work within an organizational unit, Authority to inform is the lowest level of authority you might be given. So you would simply inform your supervisor that basically this is the situation, and these are the possible solutions to whatever problems or challenges we're facing. And then you leave it up to your own supervisor to tell you basically what to do. Right? You don't even make any recommendations, you simply outline the solutions, the possible solutions. Whether or not the boss listens to you is of no concern here. So you present the situation, outline possible solutions, and basically wait for orders. With authority to recommend, you do the same thing, but you also may suggest which of the possible solutions is preferable. Again, whether or not the boss listens to you is a different story, but it gives you more autonomy, it gives you more responsibility, it also allows you to, I guess, start developing as an employee and as a future manager. At the next level, you may have a authority to report. So you do not necessarily have to check with the boss which of the options you should choose, right, to solve the problem, to solve the issue. But once the issue has been solved, you report back to your supervisor and say, okay, these are the actions I took, and this is what solved the problem. Finally, with full authority, you solve the problem, you take action, and you don't have to tell the boss. Now, you're still responsible, obviously, because in organizations, unless you are the owner, you are an agent acting on someone's behalf, and you're responsible to shareholders or whatever the case might be. But basically, in your day-to-day operations, if you have full authority, you don't have to report for any of that. You run the organization or your unit the way you see fit, and you hope that whatever you do aligns well with the desires of those who have the ultimate control over the organization. Authority can be centralized or decentralized. With centralized authority, and this is very typical of mechanistic organizations, the ones that are based on bureaucracy and set rules, most decisions are made by the top managers and are simply communicated downwards. With decentralized authority, it is typically mid level and even front level managers who make decisions. This work a lot better with organic organizations. Again, so these are the ones that are not necessarily constrained by super formal structures or rules and routines. These are the ones where flexibility is allowed and expected. So centralized for mechanistic, decentralized for organic. And finally, when we talk about authority, we distinguish between line authority and staff authority. Line authority has to do directly with the chain of command. It's, if you can imagine an organization structure, this is, something going from very top to the very bottom. It's people have authority to tell others below them what to do. Staff authority has to do with different tasks. So you remember, right? Different tasks and functions of the organization. Staff authority is vested with people whose task it is to assist line managers, right? They don't tell others what to do, but they support people with line authority when they tell others what to do. So, here we talk about legal, we talk about HR. So these are very important functions in an organization. They do not have the primary role. They are in a support role. And that is a very important distinction. In terms of organizational design, so first of all, what is it? It's basically the internal structure of the organization. And the best way to think about it is to imagine organizational chart. You've all seen them multiple times, right? Those boxes and lines that essentially represent who reports to whom within the company. And it shows you how departments are organized. It shows you, the working relationship between the departments. But ultimately, its goal is to show the power direction within the company, right? So who reports to whom? The departments within an organization that are described by this organizational chart could be organized typically under any of the four basic principles or approaches. The oldest approach probably is the so-called functional approach to departmentalization. So here departments will have to do with specific organizational functions like finance, manufacturing, marketing, HR, and things of that nature. You may also organize your departments based on the kind of product that you manufacture. So I don't know if you're Pepsi, you would probably have a separate department for soft drinks and something for snacks, and maybe something else for something else. You may organize departments by the type of customer you serve. So you may have a business to consumer kind of department within an organization. You may have a business to business. You may have business to government. So if you are Boeing, for instance, right, some of your customers are private airlines that buy planes from you. And it takes a very specific kind of approach to work with them effectively. But you also work with the government, right? You supply different military equipment to the government. You help out with NASA projects. And working with the government requires a very different approach compared to private companies. So it makes a lot of sense to set that department separately because of how different the customer is compared to your industrial clients. And then finally, especially for the multinational companies, but for the domestic, sometimes you want to organize those departments based on territory. So here in the States, a company may have a Northeast division, maybe Southwest, Midwest, Southeast, right? Talking about Florida, depending on, again, where you have presence or substantial presence, rather. In the international context, you may talk about North America, you may talk about Asia, Australia, Europe, right again, Africa and Middle East. So, depending on how diversified you are globally, it could make a lot of sense to structure your departments, your divisions along these lines. So here I have a graphic representation of how this approaches to departmentalization would look like. Right, so for the functional departmentalization, you may see that there's a president, and then there's four VPs, one for operations, marketing, finance, and HR. When you organize your company based on products, so right, if you're a store, a footwear store, you may have a department for women's footwear, men's footwear, and children's footwear based on the kind of customers. So, Johnson and Johnson here is an example. You may have a household department, professional, pharmaceutical, and industrial. And for territory, yeah, this is obviously a very simplistic organization, but it just splits the markets into north, south, east, and west. And then under each of those departments, you will probably have those same functions represented. Things like operations, marketing, finance, and HR. What that was the traditional approach to organizing. What you start seeing more and more now is kind of blended organizational forms, such as hybrid organizations and matrix organizations. Right, matrix organization is the one that is probably misunderstood the most. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about it. So again, this is a graphic representation of the matrix organization. The idea here is this. Um, if you have this traditional functional structure, right, where you have the president, and then you have VP of operations, marketing, finance, and some other functions, and then you have individual employees, each responding to their supervisor, those individuals will not be utilized in the most effective way possible. Right? There will be periods of time when they would probably just sit idle. There will be they wouldn't necessarily know much about different projects that are being pursued within the organization. So they will be kind of in a silo, being isolated from the rest of the organization. And the solution to this problem is to, in addition to those functional managers, to also introduce project managers to the organizational structure. So if you have three different projects, here you have project manager one, project manager two, and three, who can utilize those same individuals that traditionally report just to their functional bosses. And now these individuals will also start reporting to project manager one, project manager two, and three, which allows the organization to optimize the use of its human resources, right? So now this person, will definitely not be idle. This person may be overworked, in fact, will definitely not be idle. And by working perhaps with more than one project manager, you can get a much better sense of what the organization is going through. And by still reporting to this VP of operations or marketing, you'll still, keep the specialization. And it sounds like a wonderful idea, right? So it's efficient, it's great, and there's far less opportunities for miscommunication. But if you remember those principles of organizing, the first and most important one, the unity of command, it is clearly violated in the matrix structure. So all of a sudden, you have at least two bosses, probably more, that you have to report to, and that brings with it a great number of challenges. So again, if you're politically gifted, you can play them against each other so that while they fight, you sit down doing nothing and getting paid. You may also get frustrated if these guys cannot agree which one of them is more important or has more authority. So, most matrix organizations that I have met in my life were not terribly effective. It doesn't mean that there are no exceptions, but while it sounds wonderful on a paper, in real life it's fairly hard to implement. There's also this unique type of organization structure called a divisional or multi-divisional organization. And what this basically is, it is a collection of firms within a firm, right? So you have General Motors, and under it, you will have those divisions built around unique brands. And I think if you go to the textbook, it lists one of those structures examples. So each of those brands will be run almost as an independent company. Yet at the very top of the organization, there will be some knowledge sharing, some resource sharing, competence sharing that will make um, the overall efficiency somewhat higher than it could have been had these units been truly independent. And it also turns out that if you build a traditional functional kind of organization, then there are limits to how far you can grow. Because at some point it just becomes too complicated to manage, right? That there are limits to how far the organization may grow under a particular structure. When you organize yourself as a multi-divisional structure, then you solve this problem because each of the organization unit may maintain its own optimal size. And the only thing that sort of brings them together is the shared joint ownership, like the same corporate umbrella under which they operate. So this multi-divisional organization structure has been suggested as the most significant managerial innovation of the 20th century. Up until then, at best, firms would structure themselves along functional lines, and as I said, that would limit the amount of growth they could sustain. Multi-divisional organization solves this problem. Unfortunately, it does not solve all the problems, right? And there's replication of resources, and sometimes those individual units cooperate, sometimes they compete, and that could create a number of issues that are not easy to track, but at least it opens up new frontiers for growth, and that is essential. In terms of newer trends in organizational design, there are several that have been identified over the past, maybe 3 decades or so. One is, well, this one is called reengineering, where organizations realize that the structure reflects managerial thinking about management processes that was true for, some time ago. And that you do a lot of activities within an organization that do not actually create value for the shareholder. And if anything, they may slow you down. Think about all the paperwork that you have to go through when you work for a traditional organization. There are lots and lots of units and lots of people within the firm that slow things down, people that just engage in busy work that does not create value for anyone, really, except those same people. And you may restructure the organization by rethinking, what it is that you actually do and what is actually needed to get those things done. There was a famous example, and I'm afraid to misquote the company, but I want to say it was Ford that has invited consultants to help it with re-engineering the activity of one of its divisions. And that division had about 500 people. And each and every one was busy, 8 to 5, 5 days a week. There are lots and lots of paper processes that were, seemingly important to the organization, all the forms that needed to be filled out. And when the consultants came, and they took stock of what actually was going on, they realized that the vast majority of all those processes were absolutely unnecessary for the organization. They were able to re engineer those processes in a way where it only required 20 people to do the work previously done by 500. And the effectiveness, the speed, the accuracy has improved manifold. So obviously, this is a horrible news to the remaining 480 people, and it does have some political implications. But from the business effectiveness standpoint, rethinking why you have these processes and not others, re-engineering them from scratch could actually bring about very significant savings. There's also this recent trend towards team organization, especially those self-managing teams when there's no real formal interaction on the part of managers. You empower people to do the work the best they can, and then they self-organize and they self-manage, and it brings with it a lot of benefits like team spirit and shared goals. So that is a newer way of organizing work at companies. Network organizations, this is something that is very prominent in Scandinavia. So there, rather than trying to grow organically or through acquisitions and mergers, small and medium-sized companies simply coordinate their activities with other small companies. They cooperate in some projects, they may compete in other projects, but what happens as a result is you have this coalition of firms that could join their efforts towards some larger projects while still maintaining their flexibility and independence. And you don't, as you know, so they often organize in those formal alliances or networks. You don't have to be involved in every project by the network. Again, in some instances, you may actually work against the same companies that you partner with elsewhere. But that creates a very interesting dynamic, and this is a fairly recent development. A lot of companies actually join those networks right now. In Denmark, I think more than 30% of all startups start by joining those networks. Virtual organizations, these are the ones that bring freelancers together. There is no formal I guess employee relationships for virtual organizations. Think about projects, think about grant application, right? You bring together a group of people who share the same goal. It's usually like a one-off project, and once the project is completed, because the organization is virtual, it is simply terminated, right? People go elsewhere and try their luck with other projects with, other partners. Um, Finally, I want to talk about the platform organization. And this is something that is extremely recent by the management standards. Think about companies like eBay or Uber or Lyft. They do not own what they sell. Right? They are simply platforms that bring together buyers and sellers. And by providing this platform for them to organize their exchanges, they create a lot of values for potential buyers and sellers. And as a result, they can take a cut of every transaction that happens on the platform. A very, very effective way of organizing activities of a large number of independent parties. So it hasn't really existed in the past, to the best of my knowledge, but now this is one of the major trends. And so now we talked about how all those different activities could be organized within an organization, how the tasks could be grouped, how departments, divisions may be conceptualized. Another big question is how are specific jobs designed so that the structure that you put together can actually operate effectively? And there are, well, three basic approaches, I would say, that have to do with job design as such: job simplification, job expansion, and work teams that, if you do them right, will increase effectiveness of your organization. So first of all, let me start with job simplification. What it basically means is that you try to get rid of all the unnecessary elements within a specific job, right? So chances are, in whatever it is that you do, there are many tasks that are really unnecessary, and so you try to eliminate them. So for instance, when we admit you guys to your majors and minors, the process there is very convoluted. There's some paper form that someone has to fill up, probably you, has to go to the department secretary, then it gets submitted to me, then I do something. I go to the online system where I check some marks. You sign the form, I sign the form, it goes back to the department manager, and then it gets submitted to the advising office. What's the point, really? Right? There's probably a much better way of doing that. You could get, the applicant for the specific major, just submit a request, and then I, as an advisor, can simply check the box and send it to the advising office inbox. That would eliminate a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of extra steps that are truly not necessary now that we have all this computer system that can, track all the information in real time. And, if it's done properly, then nothing ever gets lost. You may also try to combine tasks. Sometimes by combining similar kind of tasks, you reduce the time and effort required to complete them. So just by thinking about the job design, you may say, well, we don't have to do A, B, C, and D separately. We can just do Z, and that will take care of, all those things. And sometimes you may improve efficiency simply by changing task sequence. So, it sounds very simple. It sounds almost childish, but for historical reasons, different processes are often organized inefficiently. If you rethink this, how the task is sequenced, you can save a lot of time and a lot of frustration along with expenses for your organization. The opposite of job simplification is job expansion. So here, you don't try to simplify life necessarily for your employees. You give them opportunities for growth and for development. And you do that through four specific means: job rotation, job enlargement, job enrichment, and you also may develop this job characteristics model that gives you sort of the holistic way of thinking about it. So with job rotation, you realize that people get bored doing the same stuff over and over. So you simply assign them to different parts of the value chain within your company throughout, a day, a week, a month, or sometimes longer period of time, so that they learn how to do and perform different tasks. They see what the strengths are. They see if there's something that they absolutely hate within an organization. So, they understand what's the best path for growth for them personally in your company. They decide that, and you have the opportunity to observe them to see where they will be utilized best for the benefits of your shareholders. So it keeps the boredom out of it. It gives an opportunity to everyone to see where he or she may be best employed, and it gives a much better understanding of their potential to, you as a manager. Job enlargement is something that basically expands the scope of your work. So you do more tasks. It does give you variety. Could be overwhelming at first, but it also gives you a sense of satisfaction, right? That I don't just do this little stupid task day in and day out. I'm also doing this, I'm doing that, right? It gives you variety. It again keeps the boredom out of it, and it gives you internal satisfaction. And job enrichment is something that companies started thinking about fairly recently. Is basically whatever you can do to redesign the job to make it more meaningful, more valuable to the employees. So, an obvious solution to make your job environment richer is to give you an option for telecommuting. Now, I understand that in the times of the COVID pandemic, this is more of a joke than anything else, but prior to COVID, if you could tell to your employees, okay, you work here in the office 3 days a week and 2 days a week you can work from home, that was a big deal. Right? So not every profession could do that. It was definitely easy for the IT people, the programmers. Um, for many professions like teaching, we did not really see that coming until COVID. Yeah, but it gives you the flexibility, it gives you an opportunity to do your own stuff during the time when you would have worked, but now don't have to. And it may increase your job satisfaction dramatically because you see that the organization trusts you, it values your time, it gives you the flexibility. If you have a child who needs to be taken care of, that's definitely very handy. So that is a great way to enrich someone's job. You give people flex time. You allow them to choose when they would work. So rather than doing it, 8 to 5 every day, maybe sometimes they would work 10 to 7 because for whatever reason it's more convenient for them. Maybe they will work, I don't know, 5 to 2, it doesn't really matter which hours they choose, whichever works for them is fine as long as they do what they are supposed to be doing. Compressed work week, right? You basically expected to work 40 hours a week. So who decided that it has to be 5 days a week, 8 hours a day? It might as well be 4 days a week at 10 hours a day. And that would add an extra day to your weekend, which many people would be absolutely fine with and many people would prefer. So that is another way to enrich jobs for people and then make them more excited, more committed, more satisfied. Finally, job sharing is when the same task that usually one person does within the company could now be split between 2 or 3 people. So, think about that as strategic part timing. Absolutely great for working parents who oftentimes need to be elsewhere during typical working hours. But whatever your circumstances are, not everybody wishes to work 8 to 5, and people may prefer to have this kind of flexibility. So they would choose to work for the employer who may give this opportunity for job share. And accidentally, it also has its benefits for the employers as well, because as part-time workers, you don't have to provide them with those same benefits as you do to full-time. So it's kind of a win-win. So once you've designed the jobs for your subordinates, you also have to organize yourself and decide how exactly you're going to delegate different tasks. And for that, you need to set your priorities straight. You need to look at all the tasks that you have in front of you and determine which of them you absolutely have to do yourself and which you could delegate to someone. To do that, there are three key questions that you have to ask yourself. Number one is, do I need to be personally involved because of my unique skills and knowledge? Number two, is the task my responsibility or will it affect the performance of finances of my department? And number three, when is the deadline? Is quick action needed? So if you answered no to question one, do I need to be personally involved? Uh, it's very clear. You delegate, right? You don't do something that you don't have to do. And then if you answered yes to question one, this is something that you have to be personally involved in, you have to assign priorities. Right? So high priority, medium priority, and low priority. If you answered yes to questions 1 through 3, right? So you have to do it. It will affect the performance or finances of your department, and it has to be done quick. This is a high priority. You absolutely have to do it now yourself. If you have to do it, but only question 2 or question 3 are yeses, right? So it will either affect you or it either needs to happen quick, then it becomes a medium priority. So you do those high priority tasks first, medium priority later. And then if you only answered yes to question one, so only you can do it, but it doesn't really affect you and it's not particularly urgent, then that's low priority. Don't waste your time, don't waste your effort doing that. It can definitely wait. You can do it later. With respect to delegation, right? So let's talk a little bit in a little bit more detail about that. So what do we delegate and what do we never delegate? So something that you don't have to do, as I said previously, you know, that's the obvious candidate for delegation. You don't have to do someone else's job. You want to focus on something that is of critical importance to you and to your organization because of the unique skills that you have. And something that, there are some tasks that could be delegated and you don't like doing those things. So that is definitely something you delegate as well. Why make yourself miserable? It could be that there are others in organizations that are better at those tasks than you are. By all means, delegate. It could be an opportunity for you to develop an employee if you delegate, right? So unless it's critical, unless it's urgent. So again, give people an opportunity to develop themselves, to become more valuable players within your organization, and they will appreciate you. They will commit more. They will start working on better and faster and more proficiently as a result. So treat it as an investment in your employees. So that's a good thing. Obviously, all the technical matters, routine tasks like paperwork, you don't want to be spending time yourself doing that. There are also tasks that you never delegate, right? So anything that has been delegated to you previously, you cannot redelegate, right? You do not have authority to redelegate something that's been delegated to you. Obviously, anything that requires your unique task, so that question one we've talked about before, is not to be delegated. All the personnel matters, evaluation, disciplining, firing, all of that is highly sensitive. And as a manager, this is your responsibility. You cannot, let out of your hands. Be that positive or negative, promotion or some sort of punishment. It's something that you have to do yourself as a manager. Anything involving confidential matters, for obvious reasons, and probably my favorite, projects or tasks that are currently in crisis. These are the ones where you'll be probably most tempted to delegate along with responsibility, but these are the ones that you absolutely cannot or should not delegate if you want to do things right. So if you are in a situation of crisis, it is absolutely your responsibility to, get your people together, get yourself together, and complete the task on your own. With respect to how to delegate, that's actually a fairly easy step. So once you've identified who you'll be delegating the task to, you need to explain the need for delegating and the reason for selecting the employee. The employee needs to know that this is sort of an honor, right, that has been assigned with this specific task that initially was just your responsibility. So that will actually help to get the person motivated. Step two, you set objectives for that person and you define responsibility. You say that, okay, you specifically are responsible for this. You define the level of authority, right? So you remember authority to inform, to recommend, and those four levels, um, and deadlines. Goals absolutely have to have deadlines within the organization to be meaningful. So you remember we talked about those SMART goals. You remember the acronym. So deadlines are essential. You help that individual develop a plan. If this is a novel task for the person, a plan has to be in place so that everybody is on the same page. Basically, there's no uncertainty and there's a clear process for communication in case your input is needed. And then step four, you have to establish control checkpoints and hold an employee accountable. Again, it's not enough to just establish the deadline at step two. You have to set up the control process so that there's feedback, there's awareness of what's going on, and there's an opportunity for you to respond if something is not done right, if something requires your input, if the person that you've delegated the task to is maybe not up to the task. So you need to replace the person or take over the project yourself. So, that step is absolutely critical. You remember that control is one of the key management functions. So establishing control checkpoints and holding employees accountable is what really makes the delegation process work. And with that, I believe I will end the session. Again, hope you guys get some valuable insights from the lecture, but do not think it substitutes reading the textbook. I definitely encourage you to read the chapters on time. You will find it helpful. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.